in order to be happy, you have to feel safe. And now that we don't feel safe in many ways, right? We're in a hotel with no kitchens. We don't know where we're moving. We don't know if we have to move in a day or two. We don't know if we're going to have enough money to provide for our families. We don't know if we can start businesses again. We don't know if we have jobs. We just don't know. And so that unknowing creates for a really difficult time for a lot of families.
Aloha, and welcome to Healers' Voices, the podcast that brings you the healing heartbeats of Maui and around the world. I'm your host, Jessica Brazil, and together we embark on a journey to explore the inspiring stories of individuals who are making a profound impact on both local and global levels. From the powerful healing of Maui, we are here to amplify the voices of healers, visionaries, and change makers. We believe in the transformative power of dialogue to chart a future where all life thrives, living in harmony with the natural world and embodying the spirit of aloha. Aloha, Alfy. Welcome to Healers' Voices. We're really grateful to have you on this podcast today to speak about a really important topic in our community as we respond to the recovery journey of the Maui wildfires and how that's just spread across our community. Just want to briefly introduce you as the founder of rebuildmaui.org, which is focused on providing for immediate and long-term needs of Maui fire survivors. And your focus on several projects, one being emergency housing and the other a transformed care program in the schools to help respond to the trauma from the fires within our keiki, or our children, that appears throughout the lifespan. I understand you come to us with a pretty strong background as a public servant and an entrepreneur, having served in law enforcement and also recovering from your own journey of loss in your 3 businesses and your home here on Maui. So welcome, Alfy. You've been a signature leading voice in our community, speaking to a lot of topics from boots on the ground perspective, as well as a really clear visionary. So grateful to have you here to talk about this important topic around facing trauma after the Maui fires. So welcome, Alfy, to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jessica.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, just to open up the space, just want to invite you if you'd like to share some of your personal experiences as a fire survivor and how that's impacted you in your journey.
Maui's had this this reputation of, where you can come and visit, and when you arrive here, you instantly you can instantly identify that there's some magic here, that and people instantly respond to it because they become enamored. They're like, wow, this place is just amazing. I just need to be here and stay here as long as I can, and I want to visit here as often as I can. I want to move here. Those are some really common comments that you hear from people visiting, and I think they're accurate in that when they come here, there really is some magic about Maui. What I think it is, and I've said this to before, was that Maui has a really unique way of allowing people to be the best version of themselves, the nicer version of themselves, a little more relaxed, a little more vulnerable. They don't use their horn as much. They're willing to say excuse me and thank you a little more, because I think they think it is as a way of a sign of weakness. On the mainland, they come here and they're like, wow, it's just cool to be nice. Everybody's a little bit nicer, and they're like, I want to be nicer, and I want to live here on Maui. And so now, I think that is, at least in my opinion, and in opinion of, I'm sure there's others who survived the fire who feel the same way, is that, the landscape has changed here significantly. It's still a beautiful, wonderful place. It's still home to a lot of beautiful people, but it is very different. Whereas, a lot of families were, I would say they were, I don't want to say struggling, but yeah, maybe struggling is the right word financially, because it's really expensive to live here, but they were still overall happy. People were happy. I think that is significantly changed. I think people are now struggling financially, as they always have been for the most part, but now they're struggling emotionally, mentally, I think even physically, because of the fires. And I say that because the fires, displaced a lot of people, right? So they lost their homes, they've lost the environment. In order to be happy, you have to feel safe. I feel strongly about that. And that goes for everyone. I think, in even relationships, unless you feel safe with a man or a woman, you cannot be happy. It's really simple. It's something very innate in us, right? Like going back to our caveman brothers and sisters. That's the foundation of happiness. You got to feel safe first, and now that we don't feel safe in many ways, right? We're in a hotel with no kitchens. We don't know where we're moving. We don't know if we have to move in a day or two. We don't know if we're going to have enough money to provide for our families. We don't know if we can start businesses again. We don't know if we have jobs. We just don't know. And so that unknowing creates for a really difficult time for a lot of families. So now, it certainly has changed the tone out here, the tenor here on Maui. Um, and and I think it's permeated into a relationship with ourselves. If I know, as a man, as a dad, when we were living in the shelters, right, because we lost our home, I felt this really overwhelming feeling that if I couldn't find a house for my family, I would be letting them down. I felt like I would be, I know the words at the time were coming to me. It's like, hey man, you're really gonna be a loser here if you don't find your family a house and get out of this hotel. And you don't want to feel that way. And you want to get a house for your kids so you can celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas, because it's going to be really devastating if we have to be here in the hotel to do that. So, those kind of things can really put a lot of stress on any relationship. A relationship between parent and a child, relationship between spouses, between friends. So yeah, there's just a lot, man, a lot. I think a lot has changed. For us, now my biggest dance, and I call it a dance because it's trying to find ways to provide financially for my family. I'm really involved in my nonprofit efforts, but just as the nature of it, it's a nonprofit. It doesn't generate the type of money that's necessary to raise a family. It's humanitarian, right? It's not supposed to. And so a lot of my efforts, although they're great for the community, I really have to rethink how much time I spend on it, because ultimately my 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 priority should be to my family first and then my job, where and for months it wasn't that. So I think there's going to be a lot of people who are doing that as well. It's a little, I think they get it wrong because of the fire, and because how traumatic that was for many of us.
Yeah, yeah, and you spoke to Maui's healing magic that resides here, and it really resides in the heartbeats of its people as a reflection of this place. And we see all this suffering, and we went into this disaster post COVID within a healthcare and a housing crisis. So it's just really compounded. And I know in our own families and relationships, that's our first resource that we turn to for a sense of stability and protection and resourcing. And yet, when we're in this environment of chaos and post disaster recovery and finding ways to put the pieces together, it's filled with a lot of challenges. And in this, we just hit our 6-month mile marker, which is pretty significant to in terms of what some of the literature says around disasters. And, I'm just curious, you've been able to cope with these challenges with a level of resilience that is quite impressive. And I'm curious, what you might have resourced within yourself that would be helpful for our listeners to hear who are maybe really struggling with their mental
Well,
health.
I will be completely transparent when I say that, and there was a time in it. I mean, I guess it still happens now, but where I would be approached in public, even through social media. I think we were able to provide some help to a lot of families. We had a couple of Christmas programs where we were able to provide resources to families in the hotels through Christmas trees and through gifting, and we had a lot of families who were able to help with those programs. And recently we were able to help find housing for some families. But I would get the comment that, hey man, thank you for everything you're doing for the community, it's so great. But what's really interesting is, I had a time in my life where I felt that it was okay to be dishonest, and particularly with women. I thought it was okay to be dishonest with women, because this comes from a childhood trauma. And I wasn't dishonest in any other part of my life, but with women was. And then I was able to address that later, a lot later in life. And I became extremely transparent, like extremely honest. And I loved it. I tell guys to be completely honest with um, a woman, and if you're dating, it's like a superpower. It's just amazing the doors that it will open, because you get to create real relationships with people, and you're not hiding behind anything. It's like the best advice, and you never hear guys talk about it, man. It's amazing. And so for me, it became extremely important to be very honest about myself and how I portray myself to others. So when I get those comments, there's a long intro to what I was getting at, is that when I would get the comments of, man, thank you for everything you're doing, it's awesome. What I found is I wasn't doing it for the community. I wasn't. I just couldn't do anything else. I would fall apart if I tried to do something else. So when you're saying, oh, what was I able to resource to be resilient? I wasn't. I think I was doing it just out of survival. It was the only thing that was, I felt like brought me therapy. It brought me like soothing and comfort. And it was very, very selfish and self-serving. Even though, I've said this to a friend, is like, yeah, man, I think you're looking at it wrong. You're really helping people. Yeah, your intentions might be that if you're doing it for you, but look at what you're doing. I mean, that's what's important, like the end result, right? Like, I know, but I wish that my intentions were matched, and I think that's so. I think I very feel strongly that everyone deals with a disaster in their own unique way, and for some reason, this is what felt the best for me and brought the most comfort. I've learned a ton through this, So, to answer your question, I didn't resource anything. I just did this because I felt the most comfort, and it was very self-serving. And I think I know I need to deal with that, and I'm talking about it helps me deal with that, because I've never shared it with anybody until just recently. I was like, hey man, I just feel kind of awful about this. It's also brought up it uncovered a bunch of childhood abuse that I never dealt with as an adult. Trauma has a funny way of doing that. It's like the best analogy, it's like a wound, right? When if the wound isn't healed yet, right, and you re-injure it, it uncovers that initial wound. And for me, I had a lot of sexual abuse as a child, and that has definitely risen to the top.
Mhm.
So
And I'm really surprised, to hear that, as a background in a long background in trauma and childhood development, because our emotional memories of trauma that come up, going through the disaster, there's like a shock, disorienting experience, and even some feelings of, environmental and systemic betrayal in the chaos that surrounds being able to effectively meet needs right away. And that can really bring up an original wound. And actually, that's just part of our nature too in response to trauma. But it's not unnatural. And I think it's an important conversation to have that childhood traumas most certainly, or untold traumas, can come up and surface themselves. And some people may be paralyzed with, I say there's like a fight, flight, freeze response. And part of the hero conflict of or responding, maybe a more refined version of fighting has stepped into service. And so I think it's important for us to just notice, like, okay, where's the origin of this, and how effective can I be? And is it okay to be stepping in and out? While also feeling your own deeper layers. And that's a powerful awareness to have. And I just would invite others listening to also embrace this practice of coming to awareness of how personal trauma can come up and be on the surface, and that it's also an opportunity for deeper healing, because once it comes to the surface, now it's not buried. It's not a scar tissue or a deep wound that's really difficult to access. It's right there at the surface, which means it's an ideal time to process.
Yeah, I think with a lot of childhood stuff, it is really difficult to access, and actually we don't want to access it. That's really what it comes down to. It's like, hey, it's buried in there enough, like it's not really bothering me right now. It's like anything that's, like that breaks down. You're like, it's not really, I don't really need it anyways right now. It's not really bothering me, so let's not even address it. I mean, that only goes so far. I just think that, fortunately I forgot a bunch of it, and is that okay? Can I pause and just close this window? Because
Sure.
I can tell that the outside noise is about to get real loud here.
All right. Well, we will just navigate the noise just like any other life issue or the interruptions, blend it into our experience. Yeah. So, in terms of thinking about ways that mental health issues are manifesting in your community post-disaster, I know you've shared that you've seen this stress really manifest itself in relationships, like in couples with children, and part for bringing this to the forefront of our attention right now. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're noticing in the community?
Well, I think what happens is what I'm seeing, what I really fear, and I saw this with our own family. If you've got an overriding fear of something that's approaching, that becomes your focus, right? If you're like, hey, if you've got like a big divorce coming down the pipeline, if you've got like a big, health issue coming down the pipeline, if you don't know where you're going to live coming down the pipeline, those are really big topics to deal with. And they really deserve all of your attention. They just do. They're just really big topics to deal with. Well, if they get most of your attention, if not all your attention, well, then other things lose your attention, like relationships with your spouse, your significant other, relationships with your children. You just can't be 100% in those other capacities if your focus is on something that is really troubling, something that deserves your attention. And so I fear that when parents and spouses have removed their attention from one another, it is really going to deteriorate those personal relationships. And what I think is going to happen, I think that a lot of children are going to begin, well, in reality, children are always being like neglected to some degree, right? We can always be better parents, but there's going to be some real neglect, some real abandonment issues happening, and they manifest themselves in really fascinating ways as adults. And I think most common we really don't look at those issues until we've like destroyed relationships, right? Or we keep picking the wrong guy, we keep picking the wrong girl. Like, how do I always pick these idiots? It's like, well, you pick them, so let's just start there. And you keep picking the wrong person, so we got to look at that, you know. And I think that what I really want to share with parents is that the way we model love for our children now is what they will interpret as love as when they get older, right? So if love feels like mom and dad drink all day and all night because they're in a hotel with no job and they're just stressed out and anxiety, and they're you know, completely devastated about everything they lost, you know, then that's what love looks like, you know, where you have very little interaction, right? It's just like, that's what love is. And so they're going to be looking for relationships that look similar to that. And it's unfortunate that, and it's not until we take the opportunity to address that and realize that's not it. You know, for me, I remember as a child, I remember going over to a house where I was dating the gal, and I never saw, this was in college, I never saw a mom and dad show physical affection towards each other, like kissing, you know, touching each other, you know, being loving to each other outside of TV. I never saw it.
Hmm.
And then when I saw it, I was like, whoa, what's that? You know, I was like, that's cool. Like, I just thought that was like, what is that? You know, I was like, I want that. Whatever that is, I just want that. You know, and I couldn't even make sense of it in my mind. I was so blown away. And I have that now. I have that with my wife. We, you know, because now when you model something else and you're like, wait a second, it is, you know, you can have something like that. And now I'm fortunate to be able to show my children what a really healthy relationship looks like, what healthy arguing looks like, you know, because it's silly to believe that two loving people will not argue. You know, I truly believe you've got to argue. I think I'm arguing doesn't mean like, you know, you calling each other names and you throw things at each other. That's not what I'm talking about. I think there's really loving, responsible arguing, you know, like as professionals, and professional meaning like you're a professional parent, and you're a professional wife, you're a professional husband. And there's ways where you can lovingly disagree and lovingly have discussions with your loved one, and then say, you know what, you know, just, hey, I don't feel loved when you do this, and I feel, you know, and I feel one way when you do that, and I would appreciate if you did this, and then you make those adjustments, right? If you love each other, you make those adjustments, and then you go back to loving each other again. And you know, it's beautiful for me, you know, because of my childhood. My wife knows that I value touch immensely, and she has made it a point that she knows that that's so important to me, because she loves me. She knows how to communicate that to me, and I know how she likes to be loved, and I do that for her. And it's beautiful. I'm so grateful for my relationship with my wife.
That's such an important point to make, because even in the middle of external chaos or disorganization, many of my teachers in my journey or mentors have shared that divorce are truly healed in how we manage conflict and intimacy in families. And what you just shared is a really good example of that. Because when we model that, you know, just like you as a child witnessing that in another family environment, you embraced that and you translate it into your life. Right now we have a lot of, you know, historical and cultural trauma that people are processing simultaneously, that's come to surface in addition to personal traumas and wounds. So I think it's especially important to recognize that multi-generational trauma and wound, to be especially aware of how that gets expressed in intimate relationships and families. That's a sacred place. Be really, really careful to give our attention.
You know what? There's another point to add in there. Is like, I've come from a Polynesian upbringing and family, so not my parents were not loving towards one another. I mean, I never saw them I maybe saw them peck once in my lifetime, and that was it. But as in Tongan cultures, which my mom raised me primarily, I identify with my Tongan upbringing. And the way that works is men and women do not interact really. They're very like stoic. They're like, you're not affectionate, you're not kissy, you're not hand holding, you're not caressing, you're not doing any of those things. You do not do that especially in public. And in fact, women kind of stay here and they're kind of do women stuff, and men stay here and they kind of do their men stuff. And anything that doesn't look like that is kind of frowned upon, and it's considered, even like it's the white ways, and you don't want to do the white ways. That's an attack on the Tongan ways, and so you have to fight against that, because and as a young child who didn't have someone to help guide me, navigate that with me, you felt like, wait a second, this is how I need to be because this is what's shown. Again, going back to that's what's modeled for you, and you're like, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to, when you get to a family function, girls go one way and men go the other way, and that's just how it works. But I'm like, no, I love my person. Like, I want my person to be right next to me. I want to share this experience with my person. And so you need to be strong enough to say, hey, I understand the culture and I respect it. However, this is how I like my family to operate and how I like to interact with my loved ones. So you're going to have to deal with it, and I'm not trying to offend anyone, but this is how I like for my family to operate. So I understand there's a lot of pressure out there to be good cultural family members, but I think that as we get older, we realize that there's better ways. And just because it's a cultural way, it doesn't mean that, you're pissing on your culture. It just means that you found a better way. And if our job is to always improve and innovate, right? I mean, that's just what it is. Like, if we didn't, women would still be, second-class citizens in every culture, right? I mean, but we've improved and we innovated, and it's like, wait a second, there's a better way. Let's do this better way. So.
And it's interesting because even just some literature, and I like to say, like the science is like representing accumulation of information from the past. So we want to always live into the present and allow that momentum to continue. But there is some powerful research that speaks to men who, or the masculine, I'll speak to, being influenced by the feminine tends to reduce violence and other problematic issues. So as we, in the relationship, allow the feminine to be an influence, which you've shared, that vulnerability and openness and honesty, that something's defined itself in your relationship that works for you as a couple, and your willingness to be influenced by your partner it sounds like it's been really important to that.
I think the strongest men, the best men that I know, are unafraid of feeling emotion. The best men, the strongest men, the best leaders are the ones who are unafraid of feeling. They blaze the best paths. I don't think it's been termed a femaleness, or however you want to call it, but it's not. It's just human, and women have just been better at it. So they hold the title for it, and been unafraid of it. That's why it's like a female thing. It's termed as like a female trait, when really you look at the best men in your lives, and they're the ones who are the most caring, the most loving, the most insightful, and then the most confident, because it requires a really confident man to be like, that's not the way to be, and you see that mostly in older men, because older men become a little more confident they've made their mistakes. That's why grandpas typically they're often like the go-to for a lot of children, because they've been through it. The perspective is different. That's the other thing. It's their perspective has changed. They have a higher, they're like, listen, I've done that. I realize that's not how to act and be.
I always say the more people who love your children and are involved in their care, who genuinely love your children and are involved in their care, and the more resourced a family is with additional support systems, the stronger that family and that child is. Because we're going to get tired, right? And single parenting is really, really challenging because you're not able to resource anybody else as a parent figure in the home. So there's just so many different layers that you're speaking to that.
Yeah, 100%. I think in every other time, we've always had a village to raise our children. We've had grandma, grandpa, uncle. We've always had those things. But now, as time has progressed, and I think the worst message now is that people are talking about, like, you got this by yourself. You don't need anybody. I'm like, in what world do you live in? We always need people. In fact, we are engineered to need each other. We are 100% designed to need one another. Like, that is in many senses the whole reason for life, is we need one another. That's just how it works. So this messaging of, like, strong women, you don't need anybody. Strong men, be a man of power. And I'm like, bro, this is garbage. It takes more strength to say I need you than it requires to be like, I'm a rock. I don't need anyone. I got this. Those are damaged people who talk like that. I believe that. I'm not a therapist, that. I don't have any letters behind my name. I'm just talking from ground level experience. I'm like, you're damaged. The healthiest people, the happiest people are like, I need those people in my life, and I love those people in my life.
Yeah.
So
we're social beings. We're wired for connection, and in fact, we have so many examples and studies that point to that direction. So, as we move through our healing and recovery journey and rebuild structures, it's also so important for us to rebuild families and systems in a healthy way that does allow us to make meaningful, healing, supportive connections where needs get met, needs for self-soothing, needs for emotional comfort, needs for food. And I say, like back in the orphanage study days when infants were fed, but they weren't held and given enough attention, they actually died. They didn't make it. And, as adults, we're
I
similar.
think about that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think about that study all the time. I'm like, if that isn't proof that we just need people, like we were designed that way to require touch, so I just don't get when people try to think otherwise. I'm like, listen, bro, I don't know what you've been reading, what you've been doing, but it's not based on reality. So just come talk to me when we're talking about reality here.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah. So as we are at this 6-month, milestone, what really sits with me is we have an amazing community of loving people. And while we have a lot of people that are really injured, we also had a lot of resources come into our community. And the conversation that has, been taking place is how do we effectively distribute these resources so people's needs get met in this recovery and healing journey. So I'm curious, if there's any initiatives or strategies or accomplishments so far that you have seen being really effective that you feel would be really important for us to build some momentum upon as a community in this healing and recovery journey.
What I think is interesting is there was a lot of resources and is a lot of resources that have come to Maui for this effort in response to the fire. What you don't see here are housing being created. You don't see that. You see about 5,000 people in the hotel at the moment, 4,000 to 5,000 people in shelters. I think what has happened is, when you're so afraid to make a mistake, you just don't move, right? When you're just like, you're so cautious. And
Peace.
I think that's what's happened. You're you're just frozen. And it's like, listen, man, we don't have the privilege to be frozen. We need to act. And many times you won't know if it's the right answer unless you actually move forward. Like, sometimes you don't want to make, you're looking at a really tough decision. You're like, well, do I choose A or B? Do I choose this job or do I choose that job, or do I choose this person or that person? Well, I'm like, listen, man, in many cases, you're never going to know. You just won't. Once you evaluated all the information, and I tell people, just go with your gut, because there's a lot of science that would support that your gut knows best. And
it's a great point.
And you'll find out. You'll just find out. And so I've gone to these community meetings and testified in these hearings, and I've urged our legislators, like, listen, guys, please just do not have the courage to make a decision. Create some housing solutions for families, and we have made some progress, just not enough.
Yeah.
And so, maybe my view is a little bit skewed because I just see what we are deficient in. I think we're deficient in housing. I think we're deficient in mental health programs. All of our, I think we were really deficient even before the fires. Kids just did not have access to adequate mental health care. They just didn't. They thought, well, we're going to have this counselor. We're going to have this counselor sit in the room, and we're going to invite kids to go talk to this counselor. And then that's it. Let's go. And that model has been in place for a really long time. And that model we know doesn't work. Tons of kids are slipping through the cracks. That is just not an effective model. And for us to not, goes back to our earlier point, in that you must improve and innovate. You must, or you rot. Those are the things. Our mental health program in our schools is rotting. It's totally rotten. It doesn't serve any. I mean, you can say, oh yeah, but we saved this one kid. Well, that's great. I'm saying that's perfect for that one child. It's wonderful. But I know we are missing tons of children. And to say that we shouldn't improve it and change it and make it better is really sad, because it's looked the exact same for how many years, and it hasn't worked in how many years. Like, I don't know what we're talking about here. And so it's sad that there hasn't been a major improvement in that area for our children, because then they just walk around really broken, and then they become broken adults until something happens to change all that. So, well, obviously we're under-resourced, but we can change that. I think it goes back to what people, to what the county, when I'm saying, we got a lot of legislators who are afraid to act, in their fear of making a mistake.
Yeah.
Doing nothing is a mistake.
It might be a bigger mistake right now, right? So I'm definitely seeing inaction, like timely inaction is, contributing to a sense of doom and hopelessness within our community. So we can learn along the way, right? We can refine and fine tune. We can fund and unfund projects that are working and not working. So
yeah,
I agree. Taking people's safety and well-being as a top priority is so important. The housing, the mental health, the basic needs, those are all definitely simultaneously important. So I'm curious, you've interfaced with some mental health professionals and organizations that have been, attempting to play a role in the long-term recovery process. And I'm curious, from your experience right now, what role do you see some of our mental health community leaders playing in this long-term recovery process?
Well, I think that right now, right now that we need to take a look at the resources we offer at schools. And the reason I'm focused on schools is because it's a platform where you can reach the most kids and have the biggest impact.
Yeah, that's true.
And at schools, there are a term, especially I'm just okay. So we take Lahaina Luna. Okay, most of those, I would say, 99% of those kids were impacted by the fires. You know, probably 100 even, you can say, because if you didn't lose a house or lose a family member, in some way, everyone on Maui was affected. Everybody on Maui was affected in some sort of way. And um, so, you know, if you were able to provide a program at the schools at some level, it's in some manner, so that you could um, more more specifically educate our kids on what trauma looks like, what trauma feels like, you know, how to recognize trauma, how to, you know, and this all goes, which I believe is that it's fascinating in schools. We don't teach children how to deal with themselves and how to deal with other people, when really that's more important than math. That's more important than English. I mean, because if I mean, whatever. It's just as important. I'm not going to say it's more. It's just as important to learn how to deal with yourself and how to deal with other people, because when you, I mean, you know, you look at how children dynamics, right? The bullying, you know, and how to deal with, you know, family members. There's just it's we need to be teaching these things to our kids. It's where they spend most of their day is at school, and we should be integrating programs on teaching them how to deal with mental health, how to deal with issues at home, how to deal. So um, I think that's where we need to start. Take a long, hard look at schools, and why don't we want to integrate those things? You know, I just think we really underserved our children, and I just I think it's really important that we get them the help that they need to help them navigate this life.
You know, I agree that our schools are an ideal setting to talk about trauma and to have paths and avenues to address trauma and any life transition, you know, whether that be navigating we have certain developmental stages when certain issues come up in our life that require giving solid attention to. And sometimes, you know, the certain controversial conversations come up because they get people's attention, and something that maybe is been numbed or buried as or secretive. That's why I think your courage to even just speak about childhood abuse is incredibly courageous, because sometimes we get frozen as adults, as community leaders. If we haven't become comfortable talking about our own experiences with that, it's kind of hard for us to have those conversations with children. And so the inaction, like you said, doing nothing sometimes is more damaging than doing something and then refining it along the way. So, and learning from it, you know, part of our life journey is learning from mistakes. And even starting this podcast, you know, I sat on it for probably 3 years, you know, expecting it to be fine tuned. And then, you know, once this, our Maui disaster occurred, I was like, nope, these conversations have to be shared right now. As uncomfortable as many of them may be, as controversial, as um, confusing, you know, we don't have to have all of the right answers right now, but this is a part of the process, is having hard conversations so that we can take action and take some steps forward. And our kids are a little bit better models to us for that, because they're not as restricted yet. They don't have as many inhibitions from in their life. So being able to explore possibilities of themselves and versions of themselves is actually a really healthy thing developmentally, and many different layers, you know, whether that be a haircut or, you know, an attraction to a type of individual or gender, or even what they like about themselves in terms of, you know, gender expression, and, you know, what's coming through them. You know, the important thing is open communication. You know, let's have these open, honest conversations. And let's make sure trauma and healing and love, and, you know, really embracing the love as the solution what does that look like? Because, like you shared, our gut knows, our heart knows, we can feel it. And, that's an important guide for us from my perspective. You definitely, it always feels very clear when you communicate that is a place you're coming from, even if it's messy, even if it's unrefined at times, even if it's not 100% accurate. That's okay. We're practicing, we're modeling, taking some steps forward in our healing and our recovery journey. So I really appreciate you embracing these conversations and having the courage to model um, facing trauma after a really, really profoundly challenging community experience. So I'd like to just welcome you to any final, thoughts or comments that you'd like to close with.
Good for you for starting your podcast. I think it's really courageous. I felt before the fire I was so entrepreneurial, and and after the fire I realized I'd lost some of that passion, and I'm now rediscovering it again. And so when I hear people not being afraid to do their own thing, man, it's cool. I love celebrating that. It's because it's so many different things. It's not being afraid. It's being willing to allow yourself to fail. And when you allow yourself to fail, it just opens up so many magical things that you can only experience through the willingness to fail miserably. It's exciting, it's scary, it's wonderful. It's really life. You get to experience life in a very unique way. And when people are frozen, right, what we've just been talking about, you really cheat yourself out of a ton of fascinating life experiences. So very cool. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's okay for us to keep adapting along the way and refining. And I just want to invite listeners, just take one step forward today, whatever that is, that allows you to face trauma, anxiety, sadness, depression, or whatever seems to feel like a barrier, or even just an action, right? Like, just take one step in today in looking ahead. And just appreciate your time, Alfie, appreciate your vulnerability, and thank you for continuing to support our community in our healing and recovery journey. So we look forward to having you hopefully again.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey through the heartbeats of healing. We hope that Healers Voices has filled your heart with inspiration and brought you closer to the spirit of aloha. As we conclude this episode, we invite you to continue this important conversation in your own life. Let these stories and insights resonate within you and inspire change in your own community and beyond. Remember, the power of healing is within all of us, and by working together, we can bring positive change to our world. Let's move forward with compassion, understanding, and a commitment to living in harmony with nature and one another. We'll be back with more incredible stories and voices of healing from Maui and around the world. Until then, please remember to follow and like us to support this continued raising of awareness, and continue practicing, embodying, and spreading the aloha spirit to make a difference in the world. Mahalo for listening to Healers Voices. We'll meet again soon.